Okay, these two crazy, wonderful people don't need introductions, but thank you all for being here and for telling us about your trip that you're going to do momentarily. And I'm just going to open us in prayer before we get started. Let's pray, friends. Gracious God, we're so grateful for our community, both here and locally. As we hear stories about this trip and all the things that Daniel and Amanda did, we're grateful for them and their ministry here and beyond. Be with us now, and may your spirit be present now and always. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Oh, I'm loud.
No, you're not loud. It's good.
I'm usually too loud.
Can you hear me? To my left. Hello. It's on. It was green. Is it green? Can you guys hear me?
No.
Okay.
Well, good morning. Hi. We're mostly wearing the microphones because they're better before they're recorded. And if anyone is watching, like Linda Fairchild, may be watching at some point. Linda, who has very close connections with Guatemala, was very interested, but couldn't be here today. I want to start, if that's okay, with a little background. Because before we get into the details of our trip that we took, there's some things that are important to know first. So in February of this year, the PCUSA, our denomination, announced a change to its approach to global mission, moving away from like sponsoring missionaries, or we call them mission co-workers, to a decentralized system that encourages partnerships between local churches and then local entities, like churches or nonprofits, wherever they may be, right? So that might be a topic for future conversation if we want. But that's a big change. I don't know, you've probably heard stories about mission co-workers around the world on behalf of our denomination. The first church that I served after seminary was in Southern California. They had a partnership with a group of churches in Nicaragua. So I got to visit Nicaragua, traveled to Nicaragua 5 times with that congregation, and each time got to know our mission co-worker and co-workers who were there. As it turned out, here in Guatemala, I had a seminary classmate who was a mission co-worker who was called back to the United States. There's a lot that goes into this change, as you can imagine. That's why I say like, it might be a topic for a future conversation if that's something we wanted to talk about, that you probably have experienced in your own lives. Maybe churches that you grew up with or in that had missionaries that you were connected with around the world. You got updates and things like that. You sent cards and letters, and we're not doing that anymore. That's a big change. And that was just announced this year. So, shortly after that announcement in February 2025, I received an email from Reverend David Lewicki, who's a clergy colleague of mine. He serves at North Decatur Presbyterian Church near Atlanta. I'm in this clergy group. I've talked about it probably way too much. We meet the first week of January every year, and I think right now there are like 16, 18 of us in this group. We come from all over the country, we gather, and it's pretty nerdy. We write papers about the upcoming lectionary texts for the year, and we present them to one another, and we usually bring in a visiting scholar, someone, scholar of either the Old Testament or Hebrew Testament and the New Testament. We alternate, and they kind of respond to our papers and give us feedback and ideas, and we sort of riff on one another, and this one, whatever, and you can talk about this. It's kind of cool. It's really thoughtfully engaging. David is awesome. And so right after that announcement, David sent an email that said, our church has had good experiences with both models. The, working with missionaries or mission co-workers, and with kind of local partnerships between his congregation and others. So working with missionaries and partnering with local organizations. One of the best partner relationships we've had is with CEDEPCA in Guatemala. CEDEPCA is the Protestant Center for Theological Education in Central America. We've had a great partnership with them for 10 plus years. I've never been to Guatemala, and I'm planning to go this October. They're creating a trip, especially for church leaders, which will focus on CEDEPCA's theological work. They're not exactly liberationist in the traditional way you think about that. We can talk about that in a second. But they are a progressive theological training center in Central America. So anybody familiar with liberation theology? some of you, kind of emerged in the, I guess, 70s. A guy named Gustavo Gutierrez in Latin America wrote about God's preferential option for the poor. That's kind of so that we approach liberation theology, approaches theology, they say, from the underside. How does this read and speak to people who are the poorest of the poor? So what David is saying, they're not exactly that. CEDEPCA is not exactly that liberationist approach, but they are progressive in other ways. And so he said, I want to see if any of you might like to come with me in October. Maybe your congregation is looking for a way to engage in Central America as we think about patterns and pressures related to global migration and climate change. This could be that opportunity. So here is the flyer that they sent out, and before getting to that, I just want to say one other thing. As many of you know, who've been around for a while maybe, PCM has also had kind of a local partnership with a congregation in Nairobi, Kenya. And that was a partnership that was facilitated through the Presbyterian. The Presbyterian of Newton, here in New Jersey, back before that merged with other Presbyterians. Presbyterian of Newton had a partnership with the Presbyterian of Nairobi, and that was like 30 years. Like I remember being 30 plus years. I remember being a kid at the church in Morris Plains, and when that partnership was kind of being developed. And so PCM was partnered with a church in Eastleigh, a neighborhood of Nairobi. And I think ours was one of the last remaining partnerships. You know, others over those 30 years, kind of things had changed, congregations had changed. There were only a handful left. And for a whole variety of reasons, also that might be a whole other conversation. That partnership was severed by the church in Eastleigh right before the Presbytery ended its partnership with the Presbyterian of Nairobi. And so they're just, the support for the partnership, the connections, they just didn't exist anymore. So part of that, while sad, also opened the door to a new opportunity, if that makes sense. Any questions on any of that stuff? Because that's all like just background, good to know. All right, some more background. When we were talking about what to share, we wanted to begin here, that we want to take advantage of this opportunity and to explore this possibility of a global partnership for PCM, if that is a desire for our church, and if CEDEPCA might be a good match for us. In addition, we know that we do not speak for PCM, so we did not go there like saying like, oh, this is great, sign us up, we'll sign on the dotted line, and we're going to send money. Nothing like that. So we know that we don't speak for PCM. We know that CEDEPCA may not be the right partner for us. We know that PCM might not even be searching for or seeking out a global partnership right now. And we are certainly not asking PCM to support CEDEPCA financially right now. I mean, if we choose to do something in the future, great, but we just wanted to be clear so that you all know that our expectations and understandings did not say, like, we were empowered to speak on behalf of the whole church. So, with that, this was the church. I said last night that I forgot how to do this slide. We did not arrive at 11:30 last night. We arrived at 11:30 p.m. on the 13th, and then we shared some of this information with the outreach committee on the 14th. So we were very tired. So I mentioned the North Decatur Presbyterian Church, where my friend David is a pastor. My friend Austin is a pastor, also in our village group at Shadyside Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If any of you are familiar with Shadyside, beautiful, old, historic church, much like, much like PCM. So there were Amanda and me from our church. There were 4 from Shadyside and 9 from North Decatur, 15 of us total. And yes, there we go.
Bob Holland went from here to Shadyside.
That is right. So former pastor here, Bob Holland, you can see his picture on the wall as you go to the sanctuary, went from here to Shadyside. If I had thought, I should have had, they have this mosaic of Jesus in their chancel, and he is like dazzling. It's like gold, like sparkling. It's pretty cool. So here we are, 15 of us, with Susanna, who was our coordinator from CEDEPCA, Espen, who was our translator, the guy in the maroon polo, and then Tomas in front, giving the thumbs up. He was our driver, and
He was the real MVP.
he was the real.
Because it took some. Oh, it's not. Hello.
I don't know if it's on.
All right, let me see. Keep going.
All right, we'll keep going. So that was us, but the trip really was to learn about the work of CEDEPCA. Like I said, the Protestant Center for Pastoral Studies in Central America. It's an educational institution that contributes to the transformation of lives and contexts by providing training and accompaniment, and by offering spaces for reflection to women and men from diverse Christian traditions, communities, and contexts. I will say, from the start, that I was not entirely sure or convinced that a partnership with an educational institution would be super meaningful. And I'll just, going in, I just wasn't sure. My friend David spoke very highly of it when he put this out to our trip, or to our clergy group, inviting folks on the trip. Another member of our clergy group who was a young adult volunteer after college, working in Guatemala. She was like, CEDEPCA is amazing, it's such a great organization. So I was like, taking their word for it. I just thought, like, what is this, right? Like, how is this like a mission partner? And so hopefully we'll tell you a little bit more about like why my mind was very open and changed, but that's their mission statement. Do you want to say something?
Is this thing on now? Hello? Is that better?
No, and I turned it up, but it's. I don't know.
I'll just look really loud. Okay, so until this is there was 4 things that we learned about. One was the women's ministry, which was super impactful there because some of the history that we learned originally before even going during some of our orientation meetings was that the structure in Guatemala it's God, then men, then women, then children. And there are certain things that people are responsible for in those roles. So it is very like role-centric community culture. So, you know,
we got it. Whoa. You got it.
Is it on?
Now you're on.
Now we're on? Awesome. So having a women's ministry, having a way that women can connect and also empower each other was extremely unique, but also really, empowering and valuable. The disaster ministry is something. There we go. The disaster ministry is interesting because it's not only reactive, so if something happens, it helps the communities there plan when something happens because of the weather, because of climate change, everything that's going on there. Volcanoes, there's earthquakes. It is not necessarily if something happens, we're ready to react. It's more just like when you experience an earthquake, when you experience a hurricane, like this is how these are the things that you need in your home to be prepared. Intercultural encounters, which I'm actually going to do last. Then the biblical and theological education aspect I thought was really unique insofar as the way that they approached learning about the Bible. We talked about that structure, that hierarchy of who makes decisions in the family, who has the power in the family. The way that they were presenting all of these theological concepts was really progressive and really rose women to kind of equal footing as men, and that is, I think, a very different way that the culture down there has historically looked at stories, Bible stories, or any other stories. So that was so cool. We're going to talk about it. It was so cool to see that come to life. And then the intercultural encounters. This to me was the biggest part of how this evolved into a mission trip for me, because there was really this like rooted
you all hear in the back? Better. Okay. All right. So the trip. CEDEPCA, in addition to all those things that Amanda described, partners with some local communities, and we'll talk about those, and then some nonprofits in Guatemala, one of which is Casa del Migrante. When we arrived in Guatemala City, the first thing we did was to go to CEDEPCA's headquarters and learn about Casa del Migrante and immigration with Reverend Elizabeth Gramajo. This was, like, from the get-go, incredibly eye-opening. She described what they have been seeing just since the first of the year, really, in terms of migration patterns that used to flow from south to the north. And so when people were passing through this house, this Casa del Migrante, which provided support for people on that migration, it was a different kind of support that they were offering than what is now, which is a north to south migration. And as you might imagine, that's mostly because of deportations in terms of flights, in terms of boats that are returning, and of course people who are traveling by bus and on foot. I don't know if you want to. This was the day. Maybe it was just we had a long travel day.
It was both. It was definitely both. This was
tears.
Yes, tears. After this session, and I think this is what I was talking about with the intercultural encounters, just that understanding of why things are happening, but then really being there and hearing about how this migration center has had to shift from kind of enabling people, as they're traveling south to north, or as they're leaving Guatemala to come to the United States for a better life, which, I mean, me as a parent, how would you not, right? Of course you're going to try for your children. I think this really hit me in a oh my gosh, where's the hope if folks can't at least try? And then seeing the reverse migration patterns of people being deported, but also people coming through Guatemala to go south now, and where are people going? And it really, I was also exhausted, but I got on the bus and I was just help! I can't stop crying. We talked a lot about hope and resilience that day because it was very eye-opening to just it in your head, but it's different when you physically go and see it and you talk about it.
And for what it's worth, I kept thinking as we were listening to Elizabeth speak that this I'm sure there would be people in our country who would be thrilled to hear that the migration patterns have changed. And I don't say that as a political judgment or statement or anything like that. I just thought this is really interesting how this probably hits different people differently, right? But when you hear stories about 17-year-olds arriving there who were brought to the United States as children, 3-year-olds, and they don't necessarily speak the language, they don't know the culture, they don't know where their family is. Those were some of the heartbreaking stories that no matter how you feel politically, it's hard not to, in a human-to-human way, go this is terrible what is happening. And people who are political refugees, from Venezuela in particular, and they had left Venezuela, stopped in Guatemala, and now they're coming back through Guatemala, but they can't go back to Venezuela. But they're also not Guatemalan, and they're not El Salvadoran, and they're not Mexican, and they're not American. So what? And so it is kind of an immigration crisis in a very different way that's happening there. So that was our first day. So it was pretty heavy from the first day to hear what just how they're trying to be the church and supportive of the migrant community. Was really heartbreaking and hope and resilience. Those were the two things we kept saying to one another. Okay, so Wednesday, it was a lot. Have you ever had one of those days when you go to a conference or a retreat, and you're just a lot of sitting, a lot of absorbing information, but that's kind of what this trip was about. So this was like really meetings at CEDEPCA and learning from one another and what they do. Walking Together was the title of the opening piece with Judith Castaneda, who is the general coordinator for CEDEPCA. I think we got a picture of her somewhere. Then learning about Guatemala's history. Super interesting history. A lot about the way the Spanish influences mixed with the indigenous culture and the classes of citizens that created, that are still, even if not like explicitly distinct, there's a cultural bias that exists, particularly for indigenous and mixed people. Learning about the history of Protestantism in Guatemala. Also super interesting. If you were to, Presbyterians, by the way, were the first missionaries to arrive in Guatemala.
Really?
Yes. And there was a time when dispensationalism, if you've ever heard that, was a thing. It said, like, Jesus is coming right away. And so in Central America, a lot of the Protestant denominations in the U.S. just tried to be efficient, so divvy things up. So Presbyterians took a strong lead in Guatemala, American Baptists took a strong lead in Nicaragua, Methodists in Honduras, Moravians in the Caribbean, West Indies. Really interesting, super problematic now from our place in history and our vantage point. You go back and you think like, wow, like that's pretty terrible. What we did in the name of trying to save people from eternal damnation, and you know, you think like, and we were trying to be efficient in that, which is, yeah. So anyway, as you can imagine, like just a lot of history, a lot of learning and eyes opening, and the thing at the end that I think stuck with both Amanda and me of that about Protestantism in Guatemala was the speaker, who's a pastor and professor, said, and I just want to thank you all for coming and trying to learn something instead of coming and spending a week digging a well or a trench or painting a school and thinking that like you have gotten to know our country. And I remember that was something that the mission coworker in Nicaragua always used to say, you go to the airport and you've got the American church groups that say, bringing Christ to Nicaragua. And you'd be like, I can tell you, he was here already there. He was there a long time before you got here, and he will be here a long time. So if you're familiar with self-development of people, anyone through like the denomination or Presbyterian stuff, like we have a Presbyterian committee here focused on self-development of people. So it's a church-wide thing. I don't know what will happen with that, with our new approach. But we got to hear about a lot of the projects that self-development of people. So 1 great hour of sharing, we know that when we give that offering. Some of that money flows through self-development of people down to sort of micro loans in places like in rural communities in Guatemala.
But like with an entrepreneurial lens,
Yes.
right? It's all for these individuals' home businesses, their business ideas to make a living for themselves. So it is very like one-to-one. It's cool.
And then the last thing was learning about CEDEPCA's Bible and Theological Education program. So this is us with Judy. There's Judy doing her little program. She's the general coordinator. That is standing on the roof, which is kind of a patio. Beautiful open air space.
You didn't get the memo about wearing this.
Oh, I did not get the memo about wearing the same outfit today. I wasn't really. That's amazing. So I don't know if you can see this. I took a picture of it because I think, like, again, when I had my mind open to like the impactful way that education can make a difference to the community, it's this. So there's theological education in Guatemala. In Guatemala, churches have well-intentioned leadership and willingness to take the gospel to all people. However, this leadership has been formed with a traditionalist theological education, right? So what you can imagine, like the smartest men in the community get educated. As a result, biblical interpretations and pastoral practice are not embodied in the current reality of injustice, violence, and other situations that affect the Guatemalan people. Therefore, pastoral preaching and practice can interpret poverty, violence, and suffering as God's will. reinforce a patriarchal society where women are marginalized, and support systems of injustice. So like last week, when I was talking about like power, like yeah, and you know these very faithful people saying, oh, this is about prayer, persistence in prayer. I'll talk a little bit about it again today, but you know it's about prayer. And I'm like, no, it's about power. You know, like the young or the widow who didn't have anything, she took down the big judge and power. And they're like, no, it's about prayer. And what they said after in our reflection time, one, I think I mentioned in the sermon that Susanna, who was our coordinator for this trip, she said that prayer is all that they have. And then the professor who was actually teaching that course, bless you, this was the final day of that course, but the course was the first course in their program. And she said, they're gonna get there. She said, they're gonna get there, but this is all they know right now. It's all they have right now. So, yeah, it is that traditional, like, you know, if you're poor, if you're impoverished, you know, like, don't worry, heaven is coming. Don't worry, better to, you know, there's eternity in heaven. It's better to be, you know, saved than it is to be rich. You know, all that. It's like, well, but you should also have like clean water and like a healthy place to live. And so that's therefore. So in response to the need for a reinterpretation of Scripture in this context, CEDEPCA offers biblical and theological education. Our program prepares Christian leaders for a pastoral practice that responds to the social and theological challenges of Christian churches in Guatemala through flexible and accessible programs of formal theological education. So basically, you know, like education transforms lives, you know, and because people take church so seriously, both for community and their theology and their sense of eternity, churches carry an enormous influence there, maybe in a way that they used to here, not as much anymore, but they really do incredible work of transformation through it. I said one more thing, and then I think I'll turn it over to you. Just about CEDEPCA's program. So they have kind of two levels at CEDEPCA. The higher level is kind of like a seminary degree, a graduate course, if you will, in Bible and theology. They're in Guatemala City and Caban. And then the Biblical Pastoral Institute is a program that's less academic, and so very few requirements to participate. A lot of people who couldn't read or write. That class that I mentioned, the 34 students, I think the youngest was 13 and the oldest was like 80. And so very community oriented. There were children running around. There were older. I mean, it was incredible. So they're located also throughout the country. Yeah, go for it.
On Thursday was a big travel day. Not our biggest, but a big travel day. So we left Guatemala City and traveled up to Caban, and there they have. Oh no, I have. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. You just have like a little voice. So from there we traveled up to Caban. Excuse me. And we actually spent time with the lower level class, and I say lower level, but you know, kind of like that community class. And this was so interesting because, you know, people would come from hours away, you know, whether by foot or by bus, and they definitely were so happy to be there, to learn these ways. We did this activity where we each broke into groups, and because there were 3 language barriers, there was English, there was Spanish, and there was also the indigenous language, which was Quechua. I'll get that as soon as I'm done talking about it. It'll land. So it was so interesting because what would happen is we all read the same passage in our groups, which was wild because it was actually a passage that we preached on returning Sunday, which was already a decision, right? That had already been decided. So as soon as Daniel saw that,
The same passage.
it's not a big deal. So we read the passage in all 3 languages, and then we were all charged with acting it out, because that is something that is kind of, regardless of what language you speak, once you hear it, okay, like who are the characters here? What are their emotions? What are they doing? And like I said, there were little kids that participated in this, and there were grown-ups, and it was really, it was so incredible to kind of see the different interpretations of the same passage, but also the different enthusiasm and people trying to understand understand each other, and it was a very, very cool activity, especially when there was that connection, that language barrier, that different connection.
And we were very much invited to participate. So, and here we were like mixed into groups where like we didn't even know the other Americans after this is like day 2, really. And you're acting out Bible, so it was very much out of the comfort zone.
In case anybody was wondering, Daniel was a judge in one of the groups.
I was the judge in the parable.
He was an excellent judge.
That was something.
This was cool. So then on Friday, we spent the morning at that higher level Theological Center. So we actually got to spend the morning with all of these other pastors from all of these different churches. Again, I say local, I say in the area, but I mean some had to travel 2 hours just to get there. And this was another one of my favorite days because it was so. We just got to spend time with people, and like their pastors in a sense are less like there's less structure to their education. Like this is the higher level, but it's not like a seminary course.
There's no 3-year degree with ordination exams.
So these are the pastors that were kind of coming in, learning these new ways to interpret these passages, and then taking that information back to their own congregations of maybe 15 people, maybe 50 people, maybe larger congregations. So it was really interesting to see everybody come together and discuss, these. I mean, we did the mustard seed, right? Story of the mustard seed. And again, because of the language barrier, the activity we broke into groups again. We all got to hear the story, and then everybody drew what they thought was the most impactful, or what the story was about, or what really resonates with you. And again, to kind of just see the different interpretations. Was one, and actually you heard a new interpretation, which
The wildest.
Yeah.
Well, I still am like thinking about this. It's like, have you ever heard? I heard a sermon once, and I like still think about it from time to time. And I'm like, I preach on a Sunday morning and can't remember what I talked about the next day. That's why I've had sermons like that. So this guy, the parable of the mustard seed, where it's like the small seed but grows into the big tree, and the birds of the air make their nests in its branches.
and so pretty much everybody had just like drawn like gardens and trees and talking about like maybe is it about the future? Is it about reaping what you sow? Like all of those like very like
Yes.
just and then there was this guy.
So he talked about, the seed becomes the tree, and the birds come, and they build their nest, and it corrupts the tree. And they poop in the tree. And they take its leaves and its branches to build the nests, and so they desecrate the tree. And I was like, holy wow, because like I never heard that. People are talking about how like, oh, and then the birds come and they take the thing and they try to fly to a new place, and the seed falls in the ground, and new trees pop up, and like it's the spreading of the gospel, And he's like, they poop in the tree, and they desecrate the tree. I was like, whoa, maybe because it's so kind of like gut level, you just go, it makes you think a lot. So anyway.
And then the other thing I'd say about that day is like when we got to have lunch with everybody, and this was like another one of those stories that I will never ever forget. Again, language barrier, we're all sitting at different tables. We were lucky to sit at our table, so he was able to interpret. And this one woman, we were all going around saying like how old we were, do we have any kids, whatnot. And this one woman was like, oh, I'm 75, and she looked awesome. Oh, she was, yeah, she's right there in the room. And we were like, no way you're 75. She's like, I am. And so Esme was like, she said she's gonna go get her ID. And she comes back, and she shows us, and something that would be, and it was funny to us at first, but something that would be so funny, like I would like roast my mom over this, and she did. We looked at her ID and we were like, girl, you're 78. Like, right? So same reaction. We were like, oh, you're so funny. Like, yep, we get it. She starts bawling. And she tells us a story about how she was abandoned by her parents, and the community had to come together to give her an official birthday. And so she can never just remember like what that is. So she kind of gives that like, but she was just like, my parents, they had abandoned me, and we were we were like, because we had the same reaction. We were like, girl, I get it. Like, it's been a long day. Like, I don't know. Like, you know. But she just took it so, and those are the kind of things that happened to a lot of these people that were there. You know, they didn't know how old they were. They had been abandoned. They would never abandon their children because of something that had happened. So that's something that was scared me until the day I died. That is definitely something where something that seems so silly and light here is so impactful and hard there. Something as simple as just knowing for sure how old you are. It's a privilege that we don't. I never considered that to be like, oh, I do know the day I was born. So.
Okay, so this was the long day. It was a long ride to get to Antigua, Guatemala. So, Guatemala City, if you think it's like maybe down here, and Coban was way up here, and then Antigua is on the other side of Guatemala City, where you have to go right through it, and what do they call it? Not rush hour. They call it. I don't remember the phrase. It's hora de pico. I think it's like but it's like spicy hour. It's like when everybody's out. It's like yeah.
And that's what I was saying before. Our driver Tomas was the real MVP of the trip because the way this man handled the bus in some of these very, very dicey situations, it was incredible.
Yes. So Sunday the 12th, when you all were maybe here in Doughnuts and Theology, we were in Antigua and we went to worship at the Presbyterian church there. Before we went, we actually got to visit homes of some church members, mostly to pick up children to bring to church. Parents who would be working. A lot of parents will get up at 3, 4 in the morning to cook some food to then take out to sell in the square. And so kids are home where they're looked after by an older person in the area. And so folks from the church, elders from the church go and pick them up and walk them to church. So we got to take part in that and to worship that particular day. That was Sunday, and I think Friday there was a funeral for a woman in the church who had been kind of a new member. She was early 50s, I think she was 52, and she had an intestinal blockage and died. So that Friday was the funeral.
But she had gotten baptized.
She had gotten baptized.
So the previous Sunday she got baptized. There was this huge celebration, and then 5 days later she passed away. Very unexpectedly. So they were grieving.
Very much. Yeah, so it was this weird kind of dynamic of like, we're happy you're here, but we're really sad for us. When we went, the home that we went to visit, there were actually 4 families that lived, maybe, I don't know, I'm trying to think like in the scale of this room, maybe half the size of this room. 4 families that were living, each had kind of a room, a common bathroom, a common shower. 4 families, corrugated metal roof, cinder block walls, really hard.
Yeah, like a common area that didn't have a roof, that had like their chickens in their cages, and then the equipment they used to go sell their food in the morning, like they had these little heater type of oven type things. So yeah, it was incredibly. It was an honor to be invited to their homes because it, and just oh, sorry. They were just, everybody was so happy we were there and so welcoming, and it really gives you your own perspective of like, how would I be in that situation? And it was, yeah.
And I think like one of the things that really struck me about that community is, I don't know, have any of you traveled to Guatemala before? So Antigua was like the old colonial capital. It's beautiful, like it is gorgeous. I have a friend actually who lives in Guatemala, and he happened to be going to a wedding the day that we were there. So I got to see him, and it's like the cobblestone streets, and that old colonial architecture. He said it's become like the big place for like destination weddings. There'd be like 20 different weddings on a weekend there. It was incredible. It was gorgeous. It's so beautiful, and literally go like a half mile off of this one direction, and it's 4 families living in this small space with a common so it is there even when we don't see it. And then after we had lunch with women from Morristown, which is Heart of the Woman, well because like when there were business meetings happening, like session meetings, of course when women were not on the session, a lot of them couldn't read. They would, if they ever needed to sign a document, it was their fingerprint. That's how they would sign my name. And so I think they decided that they wanted to sort of write a different story for themselves. So they told us about that, about how they decided to sort of pool their resources and get some sewing machines, and now they make these incredible textiles, and they're educating their children, and they're no longer needing to sign their name with a fingerprint, but actually learning to read and write themselves. Really, really, this was like the day, I think because we had such a long day on the bus the day before, I just kind of hit my like, I can't. Like I'm just like, the schedule's very packed, there's no more room in my heart. So it was one of those like push through, and I'm really glad that we did, because you got to hear these incredible stories and meet these women who, again, hope and resilience were just like the two words that kept coming up again and again. So yeah, then on Monday we took the bus to the airport and returned home. By the way, this is Antigua on the left there. Those beautiful old buildings, the cobblestone streets in the shadow of a volcano, which there are, I think, 3 volcanoes that surround the city. I think 2 of them are active. Or dormant, 1 is active. So there's that. And then we flew home, and I think that's maybe the last slide. So anyone have any questions? I can tell you one more thing about maybe just like next steps for PCM. So we shared this information with the outreach committee and just kind of said like, hey, if this was just the 2 of us taking part in a trip in which we learn more about a culture and a place, it will have been worth it for me. If this kind of meets some of the criteria that we would want in a global partner, and we want to think about this some more, great. Be very open to that. But the great part about being Presbyterian is that like I'm not the dictator of the Presbyterian Church in Morristown. We have a committee that gets to be the dictator. Just kidding. Just kidding. No. But we have committees, right? We have a committee that gets to decide and to discern. I really am joking when I say that. They get to discern, and we get to discern as well. If this is something we want to pursue. And I think, as far as like the boxes, and that I would have in my head, it's accessible in the sense that it's not, it's a few hours on a plane. It is a progressive organization that I kind of asked, like, hey, are you going to break up with us the way our partners did in Kenya? And they said no. They said no. They said that maybe some of their partners or the rural communities would not be welcoming and accepting, but CEDEPCA itself it would be. Yeah, I think in my mind it ticks a lot of the boxes that we would want.
I also think like the preparation for any trips, it's very different than going to Africa, just because like we didn't have to get any sort of vaccinations. There was no like vaccination schedule or anything like that. The flights are a little bit less expensive. It's a little bit time. Like you could do it in 5 days if you didn't travel as much in the country. So again, those are like the things. Not everybody can even be able to take at this point like a 10 to 14 day trip, mission trip, whatever we want to call it. But this is something again for many individuals is a little bit more accessible to folks.
My frame of reference right now for this is the Dominican Republic and Foundation for Peace. There's a group of us went 3 years in a row into El Batey, and we immersed in the community, as you speak, and why it worked, why did it work, and why did we go back? First of all, there were projects. We helped build a church, paint a church. We helped build a community center. We helped create a fence around a playground. But in addition, these were 3 years, separate years. In addition, we were involved in 3 worship services with them. One led by them, one led by us, and one jointly led. We ate, they the foods of the Dominican Republic. We're in an area which is very poor. You have to understand. We're not in Southern Domingo. No. There's a bridge that washed out, you know. But we live in, how did it work? Kristen Hammer. She lives there. She's embedded there. So what you need is someone in this place, in Guatemala, to kind of coordinate it. And I don't know exactly how to say how that works, but Kristen was amazing. I mean, the stories we heard, the stories we shared. Can you give a witness? You know, I get arrested and I gave a witness. I don't do that. So I guess what I'm looking for is really hands-on, embedded worship, work. And can that be coordinated? Do you see it actually working there?
Yeah, so I think when Amanda was talking about the intercultural encounters, like departments at CEDEPCA, they have, I think, two or three different, I'll just talk about two. Immersion trips, which are more like learning trips, kind of more what we do. But then they have immersion and work trips. So in June of this year, I was talking with our translator, I was like, what do those trips look like? And he said, well, in June of this year, First Press Atlanta brought 24 kids from their youth group. And so what they designed for that trip, they did. He said they did what we talked about for like the full day over many days. They did like half day because it was like that's about what they can handle, you know. And then they took the bus out to a rural community, and they had organized a soccer tournament. And so it was like youth from the community and youth from this church, but they weren't like it wasn't like us versus them. It was like mixed teams and really just for fun. And so they did that all day, had this big tournament, and then that night at dinner, you know, as Ben was saying, like, the kids were like on their phones, like with Google Translate, like passing them back and forth. And then the next day they painted a school together with the kids from the community. So I think it's more of that emphasis on side by side. If you're going to work, they want it to be side by side. That pastor that I mentioned at the end of his talk on the history of Protestantism in Guatemala, you know, he was saying like, you know, please don't come down here and pay $1,000 a person to do work that we would love to do and to pay our people a fraction of that to provide work and something meaningful for them. So I think that's really the emphasis is trying to do things in partnership and community, and I kind of love that. I'm very interested, you know, like I said, this is not like an agenda. It was an open opportunity. So if this is something you want to pursue, great. If not,
I think for me it was like a different way. It was a different way to actually look at what a trip like this could be, right? Because in my mind it was very similar. Like we're gonna go and we're gonna do. Even I struggled when I was telling like my family, oh, going out abroad. What are you gonna do? Great question. You know, but now I feel like I have such a clear understanding of why we were there, but also like the impact that it has. So I would be hard pressed to like go somewhere and just work anywhere, without kind of having that understanding and that immersion and the relationships. I think is so important.
Are there other places that would consider
other places like for a potential partnership?
Yeah, I don't understand. Is there a limit to the number of partnerships that a country can
No.
form?
No. I think with the denomination, they just said like we're not going to be facilitating these partnerships. So like if your church is interested in a global partnership, you have to sort of like make that happen. And a lot of churches already have them, frankly. We had one and we don't anymore. So this like seemed like a good opportunity. But no, there aren't limits, and the sky's the limit when it comes to But I think in my mind, like I said, there are some boxes like I would want it to be easily accessible, like the DR or Guatemala, where you can hop on a plane and a couple hours later, you're there. I think, sort of being open to like a variety of ages, like, the fact that like youth group kids can go and play soccer and get to know and paint alongside students from a local school, that's super cool. And if folks who don't have a high tolerance for sleeping on the floor of school or something, want to go and sort of learn about a different reality and a different practice of our faith, but still practicing that alongside other Christians and typically, like, I think that's really great. So for me, it ticks a lot of those boxes.
Our friend of reference, Pam and I, and Kathy and John went to Kenya. So I've got two questions. One of the most impactful was the informal conversations, as you mentioned, getting to know people, but that was in English. So I'm wondering if we partner, are we going to be able to have a cup of tea together and talk about family and religion because of the English or lack of English? That's one question. The other one was we went to 3 different communities. Each one we had a project. After the fact, I found out why they were so excited to see us. I mean, we did some work, but we also funded things. Is that also the case here? It could also be the case.
So to your first question, we can set up trips to always have a translator. So we would have that, and I really think that's like kind of like part of the experience is being like, oh yeah, what's that word? Or trying to. But we were very fortunate. We had a translator. We had multiple translators. We also had Daniel, who kind of stepped in as a translator. The funding, yes, there is a portion of it because the church that we went down with, North Decatur, they were actually going down to formalize their partnership. So we got to see what that would look like. So there is a financial element also that can go with it. So it doesn't have to be just projects, it could be, financial as well.
Right.
So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
And that is one of the things, like, I mentioned at the start, the church in California where I served that had the partnership in Nicaragua, and it was very much a struggle to not have it be like we were the patrons and they were the, the benefactors, and I think that is something actually that CEDEPCA very much tries to discourage. So I think when you go to a community and you do work on a project, like you're giving the money to CEDEPCA, and CEDEPCA is then distributing it to finance a project in a way that's sort of culturally appropriate, and that sounds like maybe it was kind of with your trip to Kenya too. So it's not like that. That we were partners with 2 organizations, but one was just a church, so it's like church to church, right? I think I mentioned that actually in a sermon. They did get to come once when I was serving there from this very poor neighborhood in Managua, Nicaragua to Newport Beach, California. And I remember talking with one of the people who said, it must be really hard to be a Christian here.
Yeah.
In all that wealth. Yeah. Oof. And here I am thinking, like, I have landed in the most amazing place, That must be really hard to be a Christian here. So anyway, it was I think because that was like a local church to church kind of a thing, like to support them without it being like just here's the money, pray for us, we'll pray for you.
I would,
I like the idea of concentrating our support in this hemisphere. And you had a lesson in humility. I think it was incredibly courageous of those 4 families to invite you out to their home, knowing who you are and where you come from.
It was a privilege.
I was going to say one more.
Well, I was going to say, I need to prepare for baptism in a moment. But I also want to just, please, outreach here is amazing committee. They do wonderful work. I was making a joke about the two. They have work to discern, right? Like, they are, we are are supporting a lot of different good and faithful work in a variety of contexts and ministry settings. So I don't anticipate this is going to be just like a one conversation and suddenly like we're partners and
No,
like
Peter has been involved with CEDEPCA for decades.
Yes.
I think, over 2 years, and this year is when they formalize that partnership. So it does not have to be a quick decision for us to begin exploring, for us to have conversations.
Okay, tell your story.
Okay, I have one last story, Nancy, based on what you just said, was, the whole, marrying the immersion and the education, and like the honor and the privilege that was to be there. That day that we were at the Bible Center, one of the pastors, we were eating. One of the pastors had her newborn baby there, and she was holding the baby and trying to eat. She was also trying to study. So one of our pastors that came with us on the trip, she figured out how to say it, and she was like, "I would be very happy to hold your baby while you eat. You can say no, but it would be so nice for you to have 2 hands to eat." And the woman gave her baby over to her, and just in and of itself is just as mom, it's like a very noble experience, right? Like you get to hold somebody else's baby, especially a stranger you don't know. Like it's a very meaningful moment. Earlier that week, we had learned about the armed conflict in Guatemala and the babies that were taken out of the arms of mothers and put up for adoption in the United States, and the level of trust that there is not with people like us, that look like us. So we, the visiting group, were watching Austin hold this baby, and because we had learned all of that earlier in the week, it was such an impactful moment for us. Something that already would be so lovely, took on a completely different meaning because of the work and the time that we had spent earlier in the week. So I think that was something that, again, one of those things I will remember forever because we had the time to learn a little bit more. So that's all.
I'm sure, seeing also wealthy people come in and having destination weddings.
And then
it's probably wonderful for the economy, but also it's just beautiful there.
Right. It's beautiful and perfect.
Yeah,
That's how it's
well, because they probably also see people be rude and
Very good.
yeah.
Yes.
Can we give these 2 people a round of applause?